Hello, I'm Hushicho, and we're going to do another Hushi Talks today. Today, I am going to be a little bit bitchier than usual because I'm talking about something that I have a lot of passion for, which is superhero comic books. I have a lot of passion for them. I have read literally thousands of them, probably hundreds of thousands of them. I know a huge amount about superhero comics, and I also pretty much despise what has become of the industry. I've actually worked in the industry, and it is unfortunate because most people that I've known who have ever gotten any sort of name in superhero comics are just giant pieces of shit, or they're just fucking crazy. Or some combination of the two, so that's really great. But there's a lot of stuff over the years that has just been god-awful, but celebrated, for some reason, to the nines. Who knows why? Probably a lot of equal degrees pretentiousness, stupidity, and a desperate attempt to connect with other people in a fandom. I don't even know why there are even superhero comic readers anymore, at least not Marvel and DC, because they haven't been good in years. Let's face it. And it's much better if you have something that will actually ever have a chance of giving you what you want out of it. DC and Marvel will never do that. They're never going to do that. All they do is operate on a golden boy system, which is giving some people with a name basically carte blanche to fuck up everything however the hell they want to. It's especially unfortunate because if they would let people write their own things in their own ways and be able to decide when they have told as much of the story as they can, it would just be an entirely different landscape. But alas, it is not. And there are too many horrible, horrible people in the industry. But on the topic of terrible writers, we come to the topic today. Brian Vaughan developed this Runaways idea of a group of young people who are, unbeknownst to them, the children of supervillains. It's not a bad idea, I will say that. It's certainly not as stupid as Vaughan's other series that he's known for, which is Why the Last Man, which is absolutely one of the things I hate the most, which is a X gender or sex is gone from the world, or is targeted by something, or I hate these stories where they feel like they have to target one of the sexes or genders just to get them out of the story, or to make the few that exist more special by default. Insert Homer Simpson reference here. Don't do that. That is a stupid idea for any story. I have never seen it done well. Don't do it. All it is most typically an extremely pretentious attempt at a story that people can pretentiously feel like they're intelligent by discussing. It's not even anything that's rational. It's not logical. It's just stupid. But that brings us neatly to Runaways, which some of you may have read, some of you may know, and some of you may not. It's basically like the Young Avengers if they were less identifiable and more completely obnoxious. The writing has gone on a journey, much like the titular characters. It started off extremely obnoxious, unfunny, homophobic, sexist, racist. Are there any other isms it can possibly be? It did not start off very well, and it really did a very bad job on the first series. I honestly think that the only reason why anybody even gave a shit about the Runaways to begin with was because they were different. They were different from a lot of things that they were doing at the time, and of course at the time, the Marvel Universe had started its plunge into the sack of shit that it became very quickly. DC and Marvel both destroyed their universes with grimdark, super serious, up your own ass bullshit. They thought it would save their flagging numbers, but all it cost them was the people that had been keeping them afloat for all these years, and when, surprise, surprise, the shallow, pretentious fly-by-night crowd didn't stay with them and keep buying, they threw up their hands and decided, well, we just need to keep doing this, obviously, because people's responses are bad, but we don't want to listen to anybody but ourselves. And they try. That's the thing. They try so hard, but not really, with groups like the Runaways and the Young Avengers and so forth. They try to be relevant and be hip and with the kids and such. This is much the same problem as I had with Joss Whedon. His dialogue makes me cringe because it is so desperate to sound youthful and relevant. And incidentally, not surprisingly, Whedon had a run on Runaways, which is terrible, but I will say this. It seemed slightly more like an actual comic book when he was writing it. It wasn't good, but it wasn't good from the beginning. So it was no real change, and I would say that it was some improvement. At the very least, he made it feel like a comic book, sort of, even though nobody had a consistent personality, and story was terrible, and they were all still really terrible people, choosing the stupidest possible thing to do at any given moment. And that's the problem. Because you know what? Teenagers are usually stupid. When I was a teenager, I was stupid all the time. I made all kinds of stupid decisions and I did all kinds of stupid things. However, I was not completely stupid and obnoxiously so at all times. The thing is, if you're trying to write a story for a certain audience, I'm pretty sure they don't want to see themselves portrayed as either idiots or total assholes and horrible pieces of shit who are awful people. But that's how it always tends to happen. Like, look at Young Avengers. Billy Kaplan is one of the most horrible people in the universe, and they won't get rid of him or let his boyfriend leave him, basically, because he's one of the few gay characters they have actually bothered to commit to. But he's a horrible person. The same is true of Kate Hawkeye McAssbag. What an asshole. In fact, Teddy's one of the only Young Avengers who's not a total piece of shit. But the thing is, like the Runaways, the Young Avengers don't really fit the universe. They never have. At the very least, the Young Avengers make more of an effort to fit, but, like the Runaways, every time they interact with someone that does fit in the universe, that character has to be completely assassinated in terms of who they are to make these characters look good. And it never really works because they don't really look good if you think about it for even 5 minutes. But every time the Runaways or the Young Avengers have any contact with any established teams, adults, even standalone heroes or villains, it is to the detriment of the character that they meet. That is also a really shitty way to write, to do anything. And a lot of people don't remember this series very well, or at all, but there was a series by DC called Young Heroes in Love, which was basically an independent superhero comic that was picked up by DC, and they were able to do some links with the greater DC universe. It was quite good, and as I recall, the interactions with the DC universe did not result in the characters that appeared being made out to be giant pieces of shit to make the characters in the comic look better. The characters were interesting in and of themselves, and even though I don't really give a shit about straight people baby daddy shit, especially not relationship drama, it was at least done in a way that was compelling and different from most of the other crap on the market. Young Heroes in Love had a decent run, but ultimately it was a little bit too ahead of its time, I think. Runaways tried to do something similar, but they really should have kept them out of the larger Marvel universe. They never took part meaningfully in pretty much any crossover that I can think of, which is great because events and crossovers are garbage and they should be done away with. But every time that they did crossover with another character or another team, every time they did crossover with another story, they made it worse. In much the same way that writers struggle to find an ability to unify the X-Men with a larger world of superheroes, which usually doesn't work. The Runaways just doesn't work in the Marvel Universe. The writing is shitty enough too, and the writer unskilled enough to confuse realism for verisimilitude, and laziness just ends up winning the day. When you basically make it into a shittier version of the Venture Brothers, you have done something terribly, terribly wrong. When you have made a corporate analog out of a superhero team, you're doing it wrong. These are not the fantastical, magical, and above all wondrous features that anybody wants to see when they read a superhero comic. Nobody wants to see a corporate drama. Nobody wants to see a too big, impersonal corporation instead of an actual superhero team. And frankly, no one fucking wants to see stupid teenager relationship drama that's not even written well or compellingly. Like, seriously, Degrassi would be ashamed to affiliate with this. 90210 would probably be embarrassed if it were at this level. If you are getting someone that writes in genres that are not the superhero genre, and probably doesn't understand superheroes, you can't just be like, okay, you're a bestseller on the New York Times list, you surely are a great writer, and writers can write anything, right? Well, technically writers can write anything. Technically anyone can write anything. That doesn't mean they're going to be good at it. And just because people might pick up a book because they recognize the author's name, it doesn't mean that they're just going to be into it. It's not the same thing. It would be like getting someone that wrote Scooby-Doo to do a 4-television adaptation of the novel In Cold Blood. Like, yeah, they probably could do it, but would you really want to watch that in the end? Probably not. So that's one of the things. Even if Vaughn wrote other comics, he's not suited to superheroes. He does a terrible job. And so many of the people that jump on this stuff and embrace this stuff think that having really horrible people is somehow better because it's more real. But no, see, it's not. The resemblance to reality, the illusion of life, is what really makes it compelling. If anything, it says more about any viewer or reader that embraces that than it does the work itself. You must have a pretty cynical view if all you can deal with is really horrible people. And it all traces back to the funny asshole thing anyway. That is something overwhelmingly, especially since 2000. 2000 was like the turning point for everyone to try and have every character, where possible, be the funny asshole. So many sitcoms have gone that way, virtually all of them, really. But they forget, or they're simply unable to achieve the funny. So all you're left with is the asshole. All the characters are assholes. I could not tell you that I gave a shit when anybody was in danger. When a couple of the characters died, I was like, wow, that's great. That's wonderful. And I never do that. I hate that. I hate it when they kill off characters, but in this case it was just like, well, I didn't care about the character to begin with. It was completely predictable that they did a heel turn. Oh, and now they're getting killed and I'm supposed to give a shit. 'Cause I don't. But that also brings me to the other point, where it really ties back to them not fitting in the universe because their parents, who were amazingly shittily written supervillains, just unbelievable from the ground up, but especially difficult to take seriously as supervillains, they were doing something that would have led to the world being destroyed. And I get some dramatic concession, but if this is in the Marvel Universe, not only would Doctor Strange, but Doctor Doom, Brother Voodoo, Diamond Hellstorm, and countless others be made aware of the situation, especially since it was a magical murder. And I can't believe I said it like that, but that's exactly what it was. The series has no value for life, and does the great thing of introducing a character to be killed off explicitly, and that is the only function that character serves, giving it completely no weight whatsoever, and, as before, everyone makes the stupidest possible decisions at any given time, which makes you want to find out what happens, not because you are really invested in it, but because you are so angry that a story and a writer would disrespect you so much that you have got to see how this train wreck of a disaster actually turns out, what stupid thing they try and serve you and sell you for an ending. And boy, does it not disappoint, or I should say, boy does it disappoint. And it only keeps getting worse. Literally every writer the series has had, I have heard, from people that were still reading this shit, that is absolutely the worst work they've ever done. And I'm not surprised. When you have these characters, there's just nothing to do with them. There's so much nothing. Most of the time, I can take at least the seed of a character and be like, okay, I can see where that would be a good character. Most of these characters, I cannot. For the life of me, none of these characters are worth any time, effort, creative energy, or investment. They are just awful. And it's especially bad because if you examine some of them, there's something there. Like, Chase Stein is obviously supposed to be the guy you kind of feel sorry for, and it's not his fault that he's an idiot, but he's an idiot, but he tries really hard. But no, he's a fucking idiot, and he's incredibly obnoxious. Just like Victor Mancha. Okay, so you decided to make the perfect boy in an android, and he's a Latin Catholic. So that's not stereotypical or anything. And apparently he was designed to be super spiritual, which is just dumbed down to specifically Christian and specifically Catholic. Yeah, that's real special. That's real special, and we love seeing that kind of shit, because it certainly hasn't been done to death. I would also like to draw the parallel here between Young Avengers and Runaways again, when you have Victor Mancha, who is sort of a fish out of water, and you have Novar, who is also the fish out of water character, going through a lot of stuff developing them as characters and genuinely making them more compelling, and then you have the asshole character who they're involved, I'm doing finger quotes, romantically with, who treats them like shit for realizing that they have a lot of things to think through, and they can't just commit to a relationship with her because they're not sure that they are ready for it or that their feelings would be what this other person needs. Kate and Nico Minoru are total pieces of shit in both series for being absolutely the worst human beings possible to people that actually have some meaningful development, some meaningful intellect, and some modicum of maturity that they lack. But every time in either of these series, we are clearly supposed to sympathize with her as she abuses the male character who has had an epiphany or is trying to reach an epiphany because he has realized that he needs to examine his feelings. So what? We're not supposed to examine feelings now? Or is it that it only counts when it's lesbians? Which is the next point. Naturally, Runaways went for the easy gay of lesbianism so that they could be inclusive. But they didn't really commit to it either. And then they're sort of kind of maybe but not really implying a bisexual love triangle thing, which I will say this. It's stupid. I would like to see more bisexual content in comics, but the thing about it is that just as my problem with the lesbian, it's not a problem with lesbian characters in any genre or any medium, although most of the time lesbians are the easy gay. You can get away with having homosexual characters if they're a lesbian because straight guys love lesbians, and actual lesbians can pretend the characters are really deeper than they actually are. Bisexuals are usually kind of, how to put this, a disaster when dealt with, especially in superhero comics, because either they are only nominally bisexual and their sexuality is completely irrelevant to their life and the story, which is their life, which makes it very questionable indeed why they even saw fit to include it, or they're just fap fodder for straight boys. Either way, I'm kinda over it. Straight boys always get everything. So basically, it's useless. Everybody else gets nothing, and they get fap fodder everywhere you turn. I do think that it's good that ultimately there is a sort of weird thing between these characters, and two of them are guys. That I will give it. That is unique. Usually, it's always no homo bro, or it's got to be girls fighting over a guy. And speaking of, the group dynamic for a lot of these young hero groups, it's a large group of gals that are boring at best, but usually kind of horrible, and a bunch of dull-ass guys because the straight boy readers, or the straight boy writer, doesn't want anything to do with interesting and attractive dudes. They're icky. The thing is, if you're gonna have a lot of female characters and try to make a sort of a statement with that, you've got to actually give them enough personality and variety in personality so that they don't just seem like one homogeneous mass of grey boobs. Just grey boobs. Gert is probably the only character in the team that gets to do much in the way of being in any way really compelling. I didn't really like her very much, but I liked her more than the others, sort of, in some ways, in most ways, I guess. But of course, that's the one that they kill off for a while, and I do mean for a while, because of course they bring her back. But like, you can't just have these other characters around and be like, oh, they're a strong female character. Well, the thing is, whether male or female, a strong character does not have to have a quote-unquote strong personality, especially not the same obnoxious, overbearing personality. Someone being abusive, as I listed for Kate earlier, and Nico, does not make them a strong person. It makes them an asshole. And for them to be celebrated for being abusive, unsympathetic, having no empathy, maturity or understanding, that does not make them a good character that people are going to like. It makes them an insulting sexist character that only does harm to the people that you're trying to appeal to. And while I may excuse ineptitude, if this were a passion project or something done for simply personal gratification, it was not. This was a comic book made to be sold to people, especially young people, in the quantities of thousands. And like, you have all these other things about it that are just really problematic or just terribly wrong. Like, for example, Molly being written as just literally an imbecile. She's not even written as... She's supposed to be 11 years old. Like, yeah, she's not that old, but for fuck's sake. Like, this makes it seem like there's something wrong with her at any moment. Everybody treats her like that too, which makes it even worse. Nico Minoru's stupid fucking wand makes self-harm into something of a running gag, and if you think it isn't, wait until you read the series, I think it's the second series, where she decides that she's done with the cutting and all this stuff, and it's like, okay, so she brushes her teeth until her gums bleed, she jokes, I hope, about slamming her head against a wall until she bleeds. Like, this was a stupid idea from the beginning. If you want to give her a self-harm problem, don't make it have to do with her fucking superpowers. And they do this with other things too, like, they do a thing with, I think it's supposed to be funny, or witty, or clever, but it's none of those things, it's the opposite of them. Where one of the characters talks about suspecting that her parents basically murdered all of her pets that she loved growing up. And that's just gross. That's disgusting. It's not compelling, it serves no purpose, and ultimately we don't get any satisfaction from it. Even when these characters die that were so horrible, it's not satisfying. I just think it's really unfortunate when you have these series that are designed obviously to appeal to a young audience, and they are designed, they are manipulative, and they use every bit of shorthand that they can to get the audience to do the heavy lifting for them and to draw that audience into what they want them to buy. They have sold it to people, and they have not sold it well. They have not sold a good product. They have delivered a bill of sale for counterfeit goods that were counterfeit in that they claimed to be entertaining. There is nothing enlightened, progressive, or even appropriate to the genre or the setting with either Runaways or Young Avengers. At the very least, Young Avengers has sort of tried to fit in, but to be quite honest, they don't. This happens so often with legacy characters and new original characters that they really want to promote. You can't just expect them to be a part of this larger world, but constantly be to the detriment of the cohesion of that larger world. And it's odd because there was this weird quote from Stan Lee at one of the Runaways issues that I remember seeing, and it was talking about crossovers and how they were usually kind of a dip in quality because they were not consistent. They would not be consistent with what a character was doing in their own title or something like that. And it was just, I was just struck by the irony that they quoted that thing that Stan Lee had written in a book that only damages everything it interacts with any time there is a crossover of any sort. And now they have called off printing some of these issues and distributing them. And some people are saying this is the end of conventional comic books and the superhero genre and whatnot. And it's not really. It's not the end. And even if all it is independent comics from here on out, or at least non-Marvel and non-DC, that's not such a bad thing. They have come to a point where it is embarrassing for people who have read comics all their lives, or God forbid, some of us who actually worked in the industry. But it's become embarrassing for us to be identified with this genre that just keeps getting worse, stupider, and more insulting and more embarrassing. It's like they don't even realize when they are being super problematic. I mean, we know that from the whole Hail Hydra shit, don't we? It's a real shame. And I'm sorry for having been so downbeat, but I really had to get this out. It's unfortunate, and I find it really insulting to all the readers. And I also have a big problem with it because it's basically exploiting everyone that buys these comics and not respecting them. And not only not respecting them, but also not respecting the characters that they clearly enjoy. So I have to say, I don't like the Runaways. I think they are one of the worst comics and the worst teams that I have seen in basically ever. Young Heroes in Love did it much better, and years before. Runaways ends up being like a less good Young Avengers, and I don't even like the Young Avengers. The Runaways manage somehow to fit in even less with the larger universe, and make you care even less about any of the characters. It is a transparent and very flimsy tactic to try and make established characters look worse to make your original characters look better. It's a very Mary Sue tactic, and it's very bad fanfiction. And that's why I'm calling it out here. Don't do that. And don't try and be funny when you're not even witty. Wit and timing are required for comedy. There is none of either in the Runaways. I don't have much hope that it will improve because, well, the title has been put to rest and then resurrected a number of times and is still technically running. But really? They're sending them back to high school for a little while? Even for a single story, that's stupid and insulting. And just, in general, shit. It's shitty writing. If you have to send the characters back to school, you have definitely failed somewhere. And I keep coming back to that. I keep saying, if you do this, you have failed. Runaways is a series of failures. And it's not even like Venture Brothers in that it's supposed to be about failure. It just is about failure. It's unfortunately something about failure, but in the very real world sense. It is a failure in every way that a superhero comic can possibly be. It does not work on any level. And I know I've been meandering. I barely had any notes written for this, and I was just speaking off the cuff, but all of these things are very prominent problems. And anybody that reads through it can recognize that simply by reading once. This isn't even fridge logic. This is something that is obvious from an even casual, cursory glance. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed my little rant. Thank you for letting me vent to you. If you like what I do, support me on Patreon. And definitely, please visit my official website at hushicho.card.co. That's card with 2 R's. I'll put a link in the blurb. If you bookmark that, you'll always know where my comics and everything else are. But thanks for listening. I'll see you again. You're welcome. Bye.